The fire pit at the center of Vale Hollow was already burning when Damon Ashcombe pushed through the crowd, his jaw tight, his mind made up. Tonight he would meet his mate, and tonight he would reject her. There was no other way this could end. His father stood a few feet away, arms crossed, eyes fixed on him like a warning carved into stone. Everyone in the pack knew what was expected of the future Alpha. Everyone except, it seemed, the moon itself. Drums beat low and steady around the clearing. Hundreds of pack members had gathered beneath strings of lantern light, their voices hushed with anticipation. Somewhere in this crowd, fate had already chosen a woman for him. He didn't know her name. He didn't want to. In a few hours, his family's alliance with the Marsh Pack would be sealed through his marriage to Celine, a woman he respected but did not love. That had never mattered before. Alpha's married for strength, not feeling. He rolled his shoulders, forcing his breathing to slow. His wolf was restless beneath his skin, pacing, sensing that something enormous was about to happen. He told himself it was nerves. He told himself it meant nothing. Elder Corwin raised both hands, and the drums stopped. Silence spread over the hollow like a held breath. "Tonight the moon binds hearts that blood cannot," the elder said, his voice carrying easily over the crowd. "Let those who are called step forward." Damon felt it before he understood it, a pull low in his chest, sudden and violent, like a rope yanked taut around his ribs. He staggered half a step forward without meaning to. Gasps rippled through the crowd. He turned, following the invisible thread of sensation, and found himself looking across the clearing at a young woman he had never seen in his life. She was standing near the back, half hidden behind broader shoulders, wearing a plain gray dress that did nothing to hide the way she seemed to fold into herself, as if trying not to be noticed. Her hair was dark and simple, pulled back loosely. She looked utterly unremarkable in every way that mattered to pack politics. Then she lifted her eyes to his. Something inside Damon cracked open. He had prepared 100 versions of the rejection speech in his head over the past week. He had told his father he would say it without hesitation, that duty came before some invisible bond he'd never asked for. But the moment her gaze met his, every rehearsed word evaporated like mist under sunlight. Her eyes were a pale gray-green, wide with confusion, and something rawer underneath. Fear, maybe, or disbelief. She did not look like someone who expected good things to happen to her. The crowd began to murmur. This was the part where he was supposed to speak the rejection, where tradition demanded he sever the bond in front of everyone, so both wolves could move on unshackled. Celine stood near the front row beside her father, her expression already hardening in anticipation of the moment Damon would prove his loyalty to their arrangement. Damon opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His wolf surged forward, with a force that nearly buckled his knees, howling somewhere deep inside him, refusing, absolutely refusing, to let him say the words. He had never felt anything like it. Not fear, not excitement, something far more consuming, an ache that spread from his chest into his throat, and made speaking feel like betrayal. The woman across the clearing, he still didn't know her name, took a step back, her cheeks flushed red, humiliation blooming openly on her face, as the silence stretched far longer than any rejection should take. People began to whisper. Someone laughed nervously. Celine's father shifted, glancing toward Damon's father with a look that promised trouble. "Say it," his father muttered under his breath, close enough now that only Damon could hear. "Damon, say it." Damon's throat locked entirely. The young woman's eyes glistened, and before anyone could stop her, she turned and disappeared into the crowd, moving fast, pushing past shoulders and skirts without looking back. The spell shattered. Voices rose all around him, confusion and speculation crashing over each other, but Damon barely heard any of it. All he could think about was the empty space where she had been standing, and the terrible hollow feeling spreading through his chest now that she was gone. His father grabbed his arm hard enough to bruise. "What was that?" "I don't know," Damon said honestly, his voice rough. It was the truth. He had walked into that clearing, utterly certain of what he would do, and one look had unmade him completely. "You didn't reject her," his father said, disbelief and fury tangled together in his tone. "In front of everyone." "I couldn't." The words felt strange leaving his mouth, like a confession he hadn't meant to make. "I tried. I couldn't do it." Celine appeared at his father's shoulder, her face carefully composed, though Damon could see the tightness around her eyes. "Perhaps he needs a moment," she said smoothly, though her voice had an edge sharp enough to cut. "These things can be startling." "This isn't startling, it's a disaster," his father hissed. "Do you understand what you've just done? You've left the bond open, unrejected, in front of 2 packs. Damon barely registered the words. His mind was still snagged on the woman's face, the exact shade of her eyes, the way her whole body had trembled when he failed to speak. Who was she? Why had he never noticed her before tonight, in a pack this size, where he thought he knew every family? "Find out who she is," his father snapped at one of the pack enforcers standing nearby. "Now, before this spreads any further than it already has." The enforcer nodded and vanished into the thinning crowd. Damon stood rooted to the spot, ignoring the stares directed his way, ignoring Celine's carefully neutral expression, ignoring everything except the strange new ache pulling at his center like a compass needle that had finally found north. It took nearly 20 minutes for the enforcer to return. By then, most of the gathering had dispersed into uneasy clusters, whispering theories about what they had just witnessed. Damon had not moved from where he stood, arms crossed, jaw tight, replaying the moment over and over, as though repetition might make sense of it. "Her name is Wren Ashford," the enforcer reported quietly. "She transferred here 2 months ago from the Northern Territory. Omega rank. No family standing in the pack. She works in the healing house. Omega rank. No family standing." Damon absorbed this information with a strange, twisting feeling in his stomach. In pack society, rank meant everything. It determined marriages, alliances, futures. An alpha bonded to an omega with no lineage was almost unheard of. It would be seen by many as a scandal, a weakness, an embarrassment to the Vale name. He found he did not care in the slightest. "Where is she now?" he asked. The enforcer hesitated. "She left the grounds shortly after the ceremony. Went back toward the healing house, I believe." Damon's father stepped in before Damon could move. "You are not chasing after an omega tonight," he said, low and furious. "You will go home, you will think clearly, and tomorrow you will finish what tradition requires. Do you understand me?" Damon looked at his father, feeling something shift and settle inside him, quiet and immovable. "I don't think I can reject her," he said. "I don't think I want to." His father's face went pale, then red. "You cannot be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything," Damon said, and for the first time all evening, his voice was steady. Across the clearing, unnoticed by either of them, Celine watched the exchange with narrowed eyes, already calculating what this unexpected turn might cost her, and what she might do to make sure it didn't. Damon walked home alone that night, the Hollow's lanterns fading behind him, his mind turning over and over the image of gray-green eyes, and a woman who had run rather than wait to hear him reject her. Somewhere in that small, quiet healing house, Wren Ashford was likely lying awake too, wondering what kind of curse had just attached itself to her life. Neither of them yet understood how much was about to change, or how far Damon would go to make sure that whatever had happened between them in that single, breathless moment was not the end of the story, but only the very beginning. He reached the edge of the training field before he stopped walking, staring back toward the lights of the Hollow glowing faintly through the trees. His wolf paced beneath his skin, restless, insistent, pulling him back the way he'd come. Every instinct in his body told him to turn around, to find her, to fix whatever damage his silence had caused. But it was late, and she had run for a reason, and some part of him, the part still capable of reasoning through the fog the bond had thrown over his mind, understood that showing up uninvited at her door tonight would only frighten her further. Tomorrow, he told himself. Tomorrow he would find her, and he would explain, and somehow he would make this right. He had no idea yet how complicated that promise would turn out to be. The following morning, Damon rose before dawn, unable to sleep more than an hour at a time. Every time he closed his eyes he saw her face, the flush of humiliation, the glimmer of tears she'd fought so hard to hide. He dressed quickly, and left the house before his father could corner him again, cutting through the trees toward the healing house on the eastern edge of the territory. The building was modest, built of pale timber, with herbs drying in neat bundles along the porch rail. An older woman answered his knock, her eyebrows lifting in surprise at finding the future alpha on her doorstep at such an early hour. "I'm looking for Wren," Damon said. "Wren Ashford." The woman's expression shifted, understanding dawning behind her eyes. Word of last night's ceremony had clearly already reached her. "She's not seeing anyone this morning," the woman said carefully. "She asked not to be disturbed." "Please," Damon said, and something in his voice must have carried more weight than he intended, because the woman's stern expression softened slightly. "She's out back, tending the garden," she said finally. "I'll not stop you, but be gentle with her. She's had a hard enough night." Damon thanked her and walked around the side of the building, his pulse quickening with every step. He found Wren kneeling in a small garden bed, pulling weeds with more force than the task required, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders. She hadn't heard him approach. "Wren." She startled, spinning around so fast she nearly lost her balance. When she saw who stood there, her face drained of color, then flushed just as quickly with something between anger and embarrassment. "You shouldn't be here," she said, scrambling to her feet, brushing dirt from her knees. "Whatever you came to say, you don't have to say it. I understand. You don't need to explain." "I'm not here to reject you," Damon said quickly, before she could bolt again. "That's the opposite of why I'm here." Wren stared at him, clearly not believing him. "You stood there in front of everyone and said nothing. Do you know what that looked like? What it felt like?" "I know," Damon said, and meant it. "I'm sorry. I intended to say the words. I walked into that clearing certain I would, and then I saw you, and I couldn't. I still can't explain it better than that." "That's not an answer," Wren said, arms wrapping around herself, as though bracing against a cold wind that wasn't there. "You're the future Alpha. You're supposed to marry someone like Celine, not someone like me. Why not someone like you?" Damon asked quietly. Wren let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Because I have nothing to offer this pack. No family standing, no connections, nothing but a healing house and a cot in the back room. You have responsibilities, alliances. I would be a mistake people would talk about for years." Damon took a step closer, close enough now to see the flecks of green scattered through the gray of her eyes, close enough to feel the pull of the bond, humming steadily between them, like a plucked string still vibrating. "But I know that whatever this is, I'm not walking away from it without trying to understand it first. That's all I'm asking. A chance to know you before either of us decides anything." Wren studied him for a long moment, wariness and something softer warring behind her eyes. Finally she said, "You're going to disappoint a lot of people." "Probably," Damon agreed. "I'd rather disappoint them than lose whatever this is before I even understand what it means." For the first time since he'd arrived, something like the ghost of a smile touched the corner of her mouth, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. Neither of them spoke of what waited beyond the garden. The furious father, the humiliated bride-to-be, the pack elders who would demand answers Damon didn't yet have. For this one quiet morning, it was enough that she hadn't asked him to leave. Behind them, unnoticed by either, a curtain in the healing house shifted slightly, and the older woman who had let Damon in watched the two of them with a thoughtful expression, already wondering what kind of storm this unlikely pairing might bring down on all their heads before it was through. Word of Damon's visit to the healing house spread through Vale Hollow faster than fire through dry grass. By midday, 3 separate pack members had already approached him with careful, probing questions, testing to see how much truth lay behind the rumors. He answered none of them directly, but his silence told its own story, and by evening, his father summoned him to the main house, with a face like a gathering storm. "You went to see her," his father said, the moment Damon stepped through the door. It wasn't a question. "I did. After everything we discussed last night." "Nothing was discussed," Damon said, keeping his voice level despite the tension coiling in his shoulders. "You gave orders. I never agreed to any of them." His father's hands curled into fists at his sides. "The Marsh Alliance is not a small thing, Damon. Their territory borders 3 packs that have grown hostile toward us in the past year. Celine's family brings warriors, resources, protection we cannot afford to lose. What does the Omega bring? A healing house and a cot?" The words echoed Wren's own, and hearing them from his father's mouth made something in Damon's chest tighten with anger. "She's a person, not a transaction." "Everything an Alpha does is a transaction," his father said flatly. "You were born into that truth the day you were born heir. I did not choose your mother for love either. and our pack has thrived because of the alliance that marriage secured." Damon said nothing, though the words landed harder than he wanted to admit. He had grown up watching his parents' careful, respectful, entirely loveless partnership, and had assumed, in some distant way, that his own future would look much the same. He had never expected the moon to hand him something different and then dare him to choose it. "I'm not rejecting her," Damon said finally. "Not tonight, not tomorrow. I need time to understand what's happening before I destroy something I don't fully understand yet." "Time is a luxury we don't have," his father said. "The council meets in 5 days to finalize the succession terms. If you haven't resolved this by then, they will do it for you." Damon left the house with those words ringing in his ears, and he spent the rest of the evening walking the border trails alone, trying to sort through the tangle of loyalty, duty, and this new, undeniable pull that had rearranged something fundamental inside him in the space of a single glance. 3 days passed before he saw Wren again. He hadn't wanted to overwhelm her, hadn't wanted to make her feel hunted after everything the ceremony had already put her through. Instead, he sent word through the healing house that he would welcome the chance to talk, whenever and wherever she felt comfortable. It was Wren who eventually appeared at the edge of the training field one afternoon, arms crossed, expression guarded but no longer frightened. "You've caused quite a lot of trouble," she said by way of greeting. "So I've heard," Damon said, allowing himself a small, tired smile. "Several times a day, if my father has anything to say about it." Wren's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "People are saying things about me. That I trapped you somehow. That I used some kind of trick during the ceremony." "That's ridiculous," Damon said immediately, anger sparking hot and fast. "Whoever's saying that." "It doesn't matter who," Wren cut in, though the flash of hurt in her eyes told him it did matter, more than she wanted to admit. "It happens. Omegas get blamed for things outside their control. I learned that a long time ago." Damon studied her for a moment, noting the careful way she held herself, as though bracing for impact even in a conversation that held no immediate threat. "Tell me about yourself," he said. "Not what the pack records say. What you'd want me to know, if none of this, the bond, the ceremony, any of it, had ever happened." Wren blinked, clearly caught off guard by the question. "Why does that matter?" "Because I meant what I said in the garden. I want to know you. Not the Omega rank, not the transferred healer with no family standing. You." For a long moment, Wren said nothing, staring out across the training field, as though weighing whether he deserved an honest answer. Finally she spoke, her voice quieter than before. "I grew up in the Northern Territory. My parents died when I was young. Sickness, nothing dramatic. I was raised by an aunt, who taught me healing, because it was the only skill she thought would keep me useful enough to be tolerated. I came here 2 months ago because the Northern Pack was struggling, and there wasn't enough work, or food, or reason to stay." "That sounds lonely," Damon said quietly. Wren shrugged, though the gesture looked more practiced than casual. "It is what it is. I don't need pity." "That's not pity," Damon said. "That's just, I'm sorry you went through that." Something shifted in Wren's expression, a small crack in the careful wall she'd built around herself. "Most people don't ask," she admitted. "They see the rank and stop looking any further." "I'm not most people," Damon said, and immediately felt foolish for how it sounded. But Wren's small huff of laughter told him she'd taken it the right way. They talked for another hour, the conversation drifting easily from her work in the healing house to his responsibilities as heir, both of them dancing carefully around the elephant standing between them, the bond, the ceremony, the enormous unresolved question of what came next. It was, Damon realized as the sun began sinking toward the tree line, the first entirely unguarded conversation he'd had with anyone in longer than he could remember. "I should get back," Wren said eventually, glancing toward the darkening sky. "The healing house doesn't run itself." "Can I walk with you?" Damon asked. Wren hesitated, then nodded, and they walked together, through the quiet trails back toward the eastern edge of the territory, the silence between them, comfortable in a way neither of them had expected it to be. As they reached the healing house steps, Wren turned to him, her expression more open than he'd seen it all day. "Thank you," she said, "for not treating this like a mistake to be corrected." "It's not a mistake," Damon said. "I don't think it ever was." Wren didn't answer, But the small smile she gave him before disappearing inside stayed with him the whole walk home, warm and steady against the cold uncertainty of everything else waiting for him beyond the healing house door. His father's fury, Celine's wounded pride, and a council meeting now only 2 days closer than it had been that morning, ticking down toward a decision the pack expected him to have already made. The pack records room smelled of old parchment and candle wax, and Damon had spent the better part of 2 hours there, hunched over ledgers that catalogued every family transfer into Vale territory for the past 5 years. He wasn't entirely sure what he was looking for. Something about the ease of Wren's departure from the northern pack nagged at him, a small inconsistency he couldn't quite name but couldn't ignore either. He found her transfer document eventually, tucked between 2 thicker files. It was sparse, a name, a date, a signature from the Northern Alpha authorizing her relocation, and almost nothing else. No mention of surviving family, no notes on lineage, nothing beyond the barest administrative necessity. It was, he realized, exactly the kind of file that got created when someone wanted a person's history to disappear quietly. Looking for something specific? Damon looked up to find Elder Corwin standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. The old man had officiated the mating ceremony and had watched, along with everyone else, as Damon failed to reject his bonded mate in front of 2 packs. Wren Ashford's transfer file, Damon said, deciding honesty was the simpler path. It's thin, thinner than most. Corwin stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. You're not the first to notice that, he said, lowering his voice though they were alone. I was young once, working under the elder who came before me. There were bloodlines the old packs used to track carefully, families with abilities beyond the ordinary shift. Some of those bloodlines were hunted, generations back, until the survivors learned to erase themselves from every record they could. Damon's pulse quickened. You think Wren comes from one of those bloodlines? I think, Corwin said carefully, that a transfer file this bare doesn't happen by accident. Someone wanted her history buried. Whether she knows why herself, I couldn't say. Damon left the records room with far more questions than he'd walked in with, and he carried them with him the rest of the day, turning the puzzle over as he moved through his usual duties, patrolling the border, settling a minor dispute between 2 pack families, sitting through a tense dinner with his father, during which neither of them mentioned Wren once, though her absence from the conversation felt louder than anything either of them might have said. That evening, he found Wren at the healing house again, this time helping an elderly pack member wrap a sprained ankle with quick, practiced hands. He waited until she'd finished, before approaching. Can we talk? He asked. Somewhere private? Wren studied his face, some of her earlier caution creeping back in at his tone. That sounds serious. It might be, Damon admitted. I'd rather not guess. They walked to a quiet clearing, a short distance from the healing house, moonlight filtering through the branches overhead. Wren crossed her arms, waiting. I looked into your transfer records today, Damon said. They're strange, Wren. Almost nothing in them. No mention of extended family, no notes on lineage, nothing beyond the basic paperwork needed to move you here. Wren's expression flickered, something guarded sliding into place behind her eyes. I told you. My parents died young. There wasn't much family left to record. That's not what I mean, Damon said gently. Corwin thinks the file was deliberately left thin. That someone wanted your history erased. He mentioned old bloodlines, families with abilities beyond the normal shift, ones that used to be hunted. Does any of that mean anything to you? For a long moment, Wren said nothing at all, staring out into the dark trees, as though weighing how much to say. When she finally spoke, her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. My aunt used to tell me stories, when I was small, about a grandmother I never met, who could do things other wolves couldn't, sense danger before it arrived, calm a wolf mid-shift with nothing but a touch. My aunt always said it was just old folklore, nothing real, and told me never to repeat it to anyone outside the family. Do you believe it was just folklore? Damon asked. Wren's jaw tightened. I used to. Lately I'm not so sure. She hesitated, then continued, the words coming faster now, as though a dam had cracked. Sometimes, when I'm treating someone, I know things I shouldn't. Where the injury started, what caused it, even things about how they're feeling that have nothing to do with the wound itself. I've always told myself, it's just good instincts. Years of practice. but sometimes it feels like more than that. Damon absorbed this quietly, his mind racing through the implications. If Ren truly carried an old, rare bloodline, one significant enough to have been hunted generations ago, that would explain the deliberately sparse transfer file, and possibly explain why the Northern Pack had been so willing to let her go without objection. It might also explain something else entirely, why the bond between them had struck with such overwhelming, undeniable force, as though the moon itself had recognized something in her that ordinary matchmaking never could. "Does anyone else in the pack know?" he asked. "No one," Ren said. "Just you. Now, and I'd rather it stayed that way. If people already think I somehow trapped you during the ceremony, imagine what they'd say if word got out that I might have some kind of unusual ability. They'd call me dangerous instead of just unwanted." "I won't say anything," Damon promised. "But Ren, if this is real, it isn't something you can carry alone forever. Abilities like this, if the old stories are true, tend to draw attention eventually, whether you want them to or not." Ren's eyes met his, uncertainty and something rawer flickering behind them. "Is that a warning?" "It's a promise," Damon said. "Whatever this turns out to be, you won't be facing it by yourself, not while I have any say in it." The clearing fell quiet around them, moonlight silvering the leaves overhead, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, the weight of the conversation settling between them, like something newly forged and still too hot to touch. Ren finally broke the silence with a small, unsteady laugh. "You have a strange way of making terrifying information sound almost comforting," she said. "I've been told I have a talent for that," Damon replied, and was rewarded with the first genuine, unguarded smile she'd given him since the night of the ceremony. They walked back toward the healing house slowly, neither of them in any hurry to end the conversation, though both carried the same unspoken awareness that whatever secret Ren's bloodline held, it would not stay hidden forever, and that when it finally surfaced, it would test every fragile thing they had only just begun building between them. Neither of them yet knew how soon that test would come, or how much it would cost before it was through. 2 days later, the council meeting Damon's father had warned him about arrived exactly on schedule, and Damon walked into the meeting hall, already certain that whatever peace he and Ren had found in their quiet conversations was about to collide head-on with the full weight of pack politics. The council hall was already full when Damon arrived, rows of pack elders and family heads seated along carved wooden benches, their voices dropping to a low murmur as he walked in. Celine sat near the front beside her father, her posture perfectly composed, though Damon had learned enough about her in recent days to recognize the tension in her shoulders. His own father stood near the front, arms crossed, jaw set. Elder Corwin called the meeting to order, and the room settled into an uneasy quiet. "We are here," Corwin announced, "to address the matter of the succession bond, left unresolved following the mating ceremony 5 nights ago. The council requires clarity before the season turns. Alpha Heir, you will state your intentions." Every eye in the room turned to Damon. He felt the weight of the moment settle over him like a physical thing, and for a heartbeat he thought of Ren, back at the healing house, unaware that decisions about her future were being debated in a room she wasn't even permitted to enter. "My intention," Damon said, keeping his voice steady, "is to honor the bond the moon has given me." A ripple of murmurs swept through the hall. Celine's father rose halfway from his seat before catching himself, his expression thunderous. Damon's own father closed his eyes briefly, as though absorbing a blow he'd been expecting, but hoping to avoid. "You intend to reject the Marsh Alliance," Corwin said, not quite a question. "I intend to honor my bonded mate," Damon corrected. "The alliance and the mate bond are not the same thing, and I won't pretend they are, simply because it would be more convenient." Celine stood then, her composure cracking just slightly at the edges. "Convenient," she repeated. "Is that what you think this arrangement was to me? I agreed to this marriage in good faith, Damon. My family has spent months preparing for it." "I know," Damon said, and meant it, guilt threading through his voice despite his resolve. "And I'm sorry for the position this puts you in. That was never my intention. But I can't build a life on an arrangement when the moon has already chosen otherwise. It wouldn't be fair to either of us." "Fair," Celine's father said, his voice cold. "Let us discuss fair then. Do you understand what you're risking? Our warriors, our resources. The protection your pack relies on against the hostile territories to our south. You would throw all of that away for an Omega healer with no family standing? Her name is Ren, Damon said, an edge creeping into his voice despite his effort to remain calm. And she is not a bargaining chip to be weighed against warriors and resources. She is my mate. That should mean something in this hall, if it's ever meant to mean anything at all. The room erupted into overlapping voices, some raised in support, most in sharp disagreement, and Corwin had to call for order twice before the noise settled enough for him to speak again. The council recognizes the difficulty of this decision, Corwin said carefully, but must also weigh the practical needs of the pack. We will reconvene in 3 days to make a final determination on the succession terms. Until then, Alpha Heir, I would advise caution in how publicly you proceed. The meeting dissolved into smaller, tense clusters of conversation, and Damon found himself pulled aside almost immediately by his father, whose expression had shifted from fury into something closer to exhausted resignation. You've made your position clear, his father said quietly, once they were out of earshot of the others. I hope you understand what you've just done. The council may not honor your choice. They have the authority to override the succession line if they believe the pack's safety is at risk. Then let them try, Damon said. I won't reject her, and I won't let this pack force me into pretending the bond doesn't exist, just because it's inconvenient for an alliance. His father studied him for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. You remind me of your mother, when she was young. Stubborn to the point of foolishness. It cost her more than once. Did she regret it? Damon asked. His father was quiet for a moment. No, he admitted finally. She never did. It wasn't quite approval, but it was closer to it than Damon had expected, and he carried the small, fragile comfort of it with him as he left the council hall and made his way toward the healing house, needing, more than anything, to see Ren and tell her what had just happened before rumor beat him to it. He found her outside, sitting on the porch steps with a bundle of drying herbs across her lap, and the moment she saw his face, she set the herbs aside and rose to meet him. It didn't go well, she said, reading him easily. It went about as well as I expected, Damon said. The council wants 3 more days before they decide anything. Celine's father is furious. My own father is somewhere between furious and resigned. But I told them the truth, Ren. I told the whole room I intend to honor the bond. Ren's breath caught, something vulnerable flickering across her face. You said that? In front of everyone? Every word of it, Damon confirmed. For a moment, Ren said nothing, simply looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite name. Disbelief, maybe, tangled together with something warmer and far more fragile. I keep waiting for you to change your mind, she admitted quietly. For the moment you realize how much easier your life would be without all of this. Damon reached out, gently, and took her hand, the first time he'd done so since the night of the ceremony. That moment isn't coming, he said. I chose this, Ren. I'm choosing it again right now. Whatever the council decides, whatever my father thinks, whatever Celine's family does, I'm not walking away from you. Ren's fingers tightened around his, and for the first time since the whole strange, upended chain of events had begun, Damon saw something settle in her expression that looked almost like hope. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the tree line a short distance away. Celine's expression carved from ice as she observed the exchange, already turning over in her mind exactly what she intended to do about it. Celine did not sleep that night. She sat in her family's guest quarters within Vale territory, staring at the candle burning low on the table beside her, replaying the council meeting over and over, until the humiliation curdled into something colder and far more purposeful. She had spent months preparing for a marriage that would elevate her family's standing and secure a lasting peace between 2 powerful packs. She would not watch it collapse, because an Alpha Heir had been swept off his feet by an Omega, with no name worth speaking. By morning, she had a plan. She began quietly, the way any careful strategist would, gathering information, rather than making accusations. She spoke first with the healer who ran the healing house, framing her questions as simple curiosity about Ren's background, her training, her arrival 2 months prior. The older healer, sensing nothing threatening in the inquiry, answered plainly enough, mentioning offhand that Ren sometimes seemed to know things about a patient's condition before any examination had been done, an odd little talent the healer had always assumed was simply sharp instinct. It was a small thread, But Celine pulled it carefully, patiently, speaking next with a pack member Ren had treated for a stubborn fever the week before. The woman recalled, with some hesitation, that Ren had known the fever would break by midnight, hours before any physical sign suggested it, and had known precisely which herbs to use, despite never having asked what other remedies had already been tried. Celine filed each detail away, piece by piece, until a picture began to form. Not proof, not yet, but enough smoke to suggest a fire worth investigating. She took her findings to her father, who listened with a slow, calculating expression that mirrored her own. If she carries an old bloodline, her father said carefully, the council will not see her as merely unsuitable. They will see her as a liability. Bloodlines like that were hunted for a reason, generations back. Packs feared what such abilities might mean for the balance of power. Then perhaps it's time the council learned what kind of mate their future alpha has chosen, Celine said. Her father studied her for a long moment. This could destroy her standing entirely, perhaps worse. She's already destroyed mine, Celine said, her voice flat and hard. I'm simply ensuring the truth comes to light before Damon commits the entire pack to a decision they don't fully understand. It took 2 more days of careful, quiet digging before Celine felt she had enough to bring before the council. Not concrete proof, but a compelling enough pattern of unusual behavior to demand a formal inquiry. She requested an audience with Elder Corwin directly, presenting her findings with the calm, measured tone of someone entirely convinced she was acting for the pack's protection, rather than her own wounded pride. Corwin listened in silence, his expression giving nothing away, though Damon, informed of the meeting only after it had already taken place, could tell from the elder's grim demeanor when he finally summoned him that something significant had shifted. Celine has brought concerns to the council, Corwin said, once Damon stood before him in the quiet of the records room. About Ren, about the possibility that she carries a bloodline the old packs once considered dangerous enough to hunt. Damon's stomach dropped. Those concerns are unfounded, he said quickly, though he knew even as he spoke that the words carried less weight than he wanted them to. Are they? Corwin asked, studying him carefully. You came to me yourself, not so long ago, asking about thin transfer records and old bloodlines. I would ask you not to lie to me now, Damon, not about something this serious. Damon exhaled slowly, understanding there was no path forward that didn't involve at least partial honesty. I don't know everything, he admitted. Ren has told me she sometimes senses things about patients she shouldn't be able to know. She doesn't fully understand it herself, but she is not dangerous, Corwin. Whatever she carries, it's never been used to harm anyone. If anything, it's made her a better healer. Corwin's expression softened slightly, though the worry in his eyes didn't fully clear. I believe you, he said. But belief won't be enough to satisfy the full council, especially not with Celine and her father pushing for a formal inquiry. They will call for Ren to appear before the council and explain herself. If she refuses, or if the council decides her ability poses a genuine risk, they have the authority to demand her removal from Vale territory entirely. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Damon's feet. They can't do that. They can, Corwin said gravely. And given the current tension around the succession bond, I fear a significant portion of the council may be looking for exactly this kind of justification. Damon left the records room with his mind racing, dread pooling heavy in his stomach as he made his way toward the healing house to warn Ren before the council's summons reached her first. He found her exactly where he so often did lately, tending the garden behind the healing house, and the moment she saw his face, she rose slowly, already bracing for bad news. What happened? She asked. Damon told her everything, Celine's careful investigation, the pattern of small observations she'd gathered, Corwin's warning about a formal council inquiry that could, in the worst outcome, result in Ren's removal from the territory entirely. He watched the color drain from her face as he spoke, watched her arms wrap tightly around herself in the same defensive posture he remembered from their very first conversation in this same garden. They're going to make me leave, Ren said quietly, more statement than question. I won't let that happen, Damon said fiercely. You might not have a choice, Ren said, her voice trembling despite her obvious effort to keep it steady. If the council decides I'm a danger to the pack, what exactly do you think you'll be able to do about it? You're not alpha yet, Damon. You're still just the heir, and apparently a fairly unpopular one at the moment. The truth of her words landed hard, and Damon found he had no easy answer to offer, no reassurance that felt honest enough to give. All he had was his own stubborn determination, and against a full council inquiry, backed by a hurt, calculating rival, and an old, deeply ingrained pack fear of unusual bloodlines, he wasn't at all certain that determination alone would be enough to save her. "Whatever happens," he said finally, taking her hands in his, "I'm not letting you face this alone. Whatever the council decides, we face it together." Ren didn't answer right away, but she didn't pull her hands back either, and in the tense, uncertain silence that followed, both of them understood that the quiet, careful life they'd been slowly building together over these past few days was about to be tested in front of the entire pack, with far higher stakes than either of them had been prepared for. The summons arrived the next morning, delivered by a pack enforcer who wouldn't quite meet Ren's eyes as he handed her the folded parchment bearing the council's seal. She read it twice before setting it down on the healing house counter, her hands trembling slightly, despite her best effort to steady them. The council would convene in 2 days to formally address concerns raised about her background, and she was required to appear and answer whatever questions they put to her. Word spread through the pack almost immediately, as it always seemed to. By that afternoon, Ren noticed the shift in how people looked at her. Glances lingering a moment too long, conversations dropping to whispers when she passed, a few pack members crossing to the opposite side of the path rather than walk near her. It was nothing overtly hostile, nothing she could point to directly, but the accumulated weight of it pressed down on her like a stone she couldn't set aside. Damon spent those 2 days doing everything within his power to prepare. He met with Corwin repeatedly, trying to understand exactly what the council would demand, what proof they might require, what outcomes were realistically on the table. He spoke with pack members who had known Ren longest, hoping to gather testimony that might balance whatever Celine had assembled against her. He even, in a moment of quiet desperation, sought out his father, who listened to the situation with a troubled expression Damon hadn't expected. "I don't like what's happening," his father admitted, surprising Damon with the honesty in his voice. "Whatever my objections to this bond, hunting someone for an ability they never chose and never asked for, that's not the kind of pack I want to lead, or the kind I want you to inherit." "Does that mean you'll help?" Damon asked. His father was quiet for a long moment. "I'll speak on her behalf," he said finally, "not because I've changed my mind about the alliance, but because fear should never be mistaken for wisdom. I've seen packs make that mistake before, and it never ends well for anyone." It wasn't everything Damon had hoped for, but it was more than he'd expected, and he carried the small comfort of it with him as the day of the inquiry finally arrived. The council hall was packed tighter than it had been for the earlier meeting, word of the inquiry having drawn nearly every pack member curious enough to witness it firsthand. Ren stood at the center of the room, alone, her spine straight despite the visible tension in her shoulders, and Damon took his place beside her, ignoring the surprised murmurs that rippled through the crowd at the sight of the alpha heir standing so visibly at her side. Corwin called the inquiry to order, and Celine's father rose first, presenting the pattern of small observations his daughter had gathered. The fever, that broke exactly when Ren predicted. The herbs chosen before any diagnosis had been given. The accumulated weight of small, unexplainable moments that, laid out together, painted a picture of something beyond ordinary healing skill. "We are not accusing this young woman of malice," Celine's father said, his tone carefully reasonable. "But the old bloodlines were feared for good reason. Abilities like these, left unchecked and poorly understood, have historically brought great harm to the packs that harbored them. We ask only that the council consider whether Vale territory can safely accommodate such a risk." When it came time for Ren to speak, her voice shook only slightly at first, steadying as she continued. "I don't fully understand what I carry," she admitted honestly, the words clearly costing her something to say aloud, in front of so many watching faces. "My aunt told me stories about a grandmother with similar instincts, and I always assumed they were just stories. If there's more to it than that, I've never used it to harm anyone. Every patient I've treated, every fever I've predicted, every wound I've healed faster than expected, it's only ever helped people. I don't know how to be afraid of something that's only ever done good." A murmur swept through the hall, some sympathetic, others clearly unconvinced. Corwin allowed several pack members to speak in turn, some testifying to Ren's careful, gentle work in the healing house over the past 2 months, others voicing the old, ingrained fear that had followed bloodlines like hers for generations. Then Damon's father rose. "I did not support this bond when it first formed," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed hall. "I still have concerns about what this pact stands to lose, in terms of alliance and protection. But I have watched this young woman for the better part of 2 weeks now, and I have seen nothing in her behavior that resembles a threat. What I have seen is fear. Pack members afraid of something they don't understand, reaching for old stories instead of looking at the person standing in front of them. I would ask the council to weigh evidence over inherited fear before making a decision this significant." The hall fell into a tense, considering silence, and Corwin exchanged a long look with the other elders seated beside him before finally speaking. "The council will deliberate," he announced, "and deliver its decision within the day." The waiting that followed felt endless. Damon and Ren sat together outside the council hall, neither speaking much, both too anxious to manage more than fragments of conversation. When the hall doors finally opened hours later, and Corwin stepped out, his expression unreadable, Damon felt his heart lurch painfully in his chest. "The council has reached its decision," Corwin announced. "Ren Ashford will not be removed from Vale territory. However, given the unresolved nature of her ability, the council requires that it be studied and understood before any further judgment is made regarding her long-term standing within the pack." It wasn't the full, unconditional acceptance Damon had hoped for, but it was survival, and relief crashed through him hard enough that he had to steady himself against the wall beside him. Beside him, Ren let out a shaky breath, tears finally slipping free after 2 days of carefully held composure. "It's not over," she said quietly. "This isn't the end of it." "No," Damon agreed, taking her hand. "But it's not the end of you either, and that's what matters most right now." Neither of them noticed Celine watching from across the courtyard, her expression tight with frustration at the outcome, already turning her mind toward what she might try next, unaware that events far beyond her control were already gathering on the horizon, events that would soon make the question of Ren's bloodline far more urgent than anyone in that council hall had yet realized. In the weeks following the council's decision, a fragile kind of peace settled over Vale territory. It was not the easy acceptance Damon had hoped for, but it was something. Pack members who had once whispered behind Ren's back, now offering cautious nods when she passed. Patients, who had hesitated before returning to the healing house, slowly trickling back once word spread that her care remained as steady and skilled as ever. Damon spent every spare hour he could find at her side, and the bond between them, once a source of confusion and upheaval, had settled into something that felt, for the first time, unmistakably like the beginning of real partnership. He decided it was time to make his commitment permanent and public, in a way that left no room for further council debate or Celine's continued maneuvering. He found Ren early one evening, sitting on the healing house porch with a cup of tea cooling untouched in her hands, staring out at the fading light with the particular stillness she wore whenever her thoughts had wandered somewhere heavy. "I want to declare you as my chosen mate," Damon said, sitting down beside her without preamble. "Formally, before the full pack, not just an unresolved bond the council tolerates, but a choice I'm making, publicly and permanently." Ren turned to look at him, surprise and wariness both flickering across her face. "Damon, the council only just agreed not to remove me. Declaring me as your chosen mate now, that would look like you're defying them outright." "I am defying them," Damon said simply, "not out of recklessness, because I've spent every day these past weeks more certain than the last that this is exactly what I want. I don't want to wait for permission that may never come easily. I want the pack to see, clearly, that this bond isn't a mistake to be managed. It's a choice I'm proud to make." Ren was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tightening slightly around her teacup. "And if the council pushes back, if they see it as a challenge to their authority, then I'll face that too," Damon said. "But I'm done letting fear and old prejudice dictate the terms of my own life, Ren. I want this. I want you. I'm not interested in hiding that any longer." Something in Ren's expression softened, vulnerability and hope tangled together, as she finally allowed herself a small, unguarded smile. "All right," she said, "if you're certain." "I've never been more certain of anything," Damon said. The declaration ceremony was smaller than the original mating ceremony had been, held at Damon's request in the same clearing where the bond had first formed, though this time the atmosphere carried none of the anxious uncertainty of that earlier night. Damon stood before the gathered pack, Ren at his side, and spoke plainly and without hesitation. "Many of you watched the moon bind me to my mate weeks ago," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the clearing. "Some of you have questioned that bond since, and I understand why. Change is unsettling, especially when it arrives without warning, and defies expectations we've long taken for granted. But I stand before you today to say, clearly and without reservation, that I choose Ren Ashford, not because tradition demands it, and not despite the doubts some of you still carry, but because I have come to know her these past weeks, as steady, honest, and good in every way that matters. I ask this pack to trust that choice, as I have come to trust it myself." The response was mixed, as Damon had expected. Scattered applause from those who had watched Ren's quiet dedication in the healing house, uneasy silence from those still wary of the unresolved questions surrounding her bloodline. But it was, undeniably, a public commitment now, one that could not easily be undone or quietly dismissed by council maneuvering. Celine, watching from the edge of the gathering, felt something inside her finally crack. She had spent weeks telling herself that reason, careful evidence, and patient pressure would eventually bring the council around to seeing things her way, that Damon's infatuation would fade under enough scrutiny, that duty would eventually reassert itself over whatever spell the bond had cast over him. Watching him declare Ren his chosen mate in front of the entire gathered pack, with a conviction that left no room for doubt, she understood at last that she had lost, completely and irreversibly. She did not confront Damon that night. Instead, she returned to her family's guest quarters and sat for a long time in silence, turning over in her mind everything she had learned during her investigation into Ren's background, including one detail she had deliberately withheld from the council inquiry, a detail far more dangerous than anything she had already revealed. During her digging, she had come across an old, half-forgotten record referencing a bloodline hunted generations ago, not merely for its unusual healing instincts, but for a far rarer and more coveted ability tied to it, one that certain hostile factions beyond Vale territory would very likely still be interested in acquiring, if they knew where to look. She had kept that information to herself so far, uncertain what to do with it. Now, staring at the candle burning low on her table, humiliation and wounded pride curdling into something colder and far more dangerous, she began to wonder whether there might be a way to use it after all. Not necessarily to expose Ren to the Vale Council again, but to ensure that the consequences of Damon's public defiance reached far beyond anything he had prepared himself for. She did not yet have a plan, but the seed of one had taken root, and in the days that followed, Celine began making quiet inquiries of her own, reaching out through old family connections toward territories far less friendly than Vale, unaware that her wounded pride was about to set in motion a threat that would put everyone she claimed to be protecting directly in harm's way. Nearly 2 weeks passed before Damon noticed anything unusual. It started small, a patrol reporting unfamiliar scent markers along the southern border, faint enough that they might have belonged to travelers passing through, rather than any deliberate incursion. Then a second patrol reported the same unfamiliar scent closer to the healing house itself, and Damon's instincts, already sharpened by weeks of vigilance, began to prickle with unease. He raised the concern with his father, who ordered increased patrols along the border without much alarm, assuming it was likely nothing more than scouts from a neighboring territory testing boundaries, a common enough occurrence that rarely amounted to anything serious. But Damon couldn't shake the feeling that something more deliberate was unfolding, especially once he learned, through a quiet conversation with Corwin, that the unfamiliar scent bore markers consistent with a territory known for its hostility toward Vale in recent years, one of the very packs his father had cited during the council debate as a reason the Marsh alliance mattered so much. He confronted Celine directly, unable to shake his suspicion that her earlier investigation into Ren's bloodline might have traveled further than the Vale Council chambers. He found her in the training field, and something in her expression the moment she saw him approach told him his instincts hadn't been wrong. "What did you do?" he asked, no preamble, no patience left for careful diplomacy. Celine's composure flickered, guilt and defiance warring behind her eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't," Damon said sharply. Strange scouts along our border, appearing right around the time you would have had every reason to want Ren gone from this pack by any means necessary. Tell me you had nothing to do with it." For a long moment, Celine said nothing, and the silence told Damon everything he needed to know. "I made some inquiries," she admitted finally, her voice tight. "I never meant for it to go this far. I only wanted information, leverage, something to make the council see reason, without me having to sit back and watch you throw away everything my family and I worked toward. I didn't invite anyone to attack Ren, I swear that much." "But you told someone about her bloodline," Damon pressed. "Someone outside Vale territory." Celine's silence answered him again, and this time she looked away, unable to hold his gaze. There were rumors, in old family records, about what her bloodline was truly capable of. More than just healing instincts. I mentioned it, carelessly, to someone I thought could be trusted to keep it quiet. I didn't think. "You didn't think," Damon repeated, fury and fear tangled together in his chest. "Do you understand what you might have just done? If hostile scouts are already testing our borders, they're not here out of curiosity, Celine. They're here because they believe Ren is worth taking." Celine's face went pale, the full weight of her actions finally landing. "I'll help however I can," she said quietly. "Whatever this costs me, I never wanted anyone harmed." Damon didn't have time to decide whether he believed her. He turned and ran, wolf senses flaring, instinct driving him faster than he'd moved in weeks, straight toward the healing house, praying he wasn't already too late. He arrived to find the healing house quiet, too quiet, the front door standing ajar despite the late hour. His heart lurched violently as he pushed inside, calling Ren's name, met only by silence in the empty front room. He found the older healer in the back, tied but unharmed, terror written across her face as she gasped out what had happened. 3 unfamiliar wolves, shifted partway to human form, had come through the back entrance only minutes before, overpowering her before she could raise an alarm, and had taken Ren with them into the trees beyond the eastern border. Damon didn't wait to hear more. He tore out the back entrance, following the fresh scent trail with a speed and ferocity that left the healer staring after him in stunned silence, his wolf surging forward with a desperate, singular purpose that eclipsed every careful, measured version of himself he'd been for the past several weeks. Behind him, word spread through the territory in a matter of minutes, pack enforcers mobilizing, his father issuing orders with a grim urgency that finally matched the seriousness of the threat, and even Celine, pale and shaking with guilt, joining the search effort in whatever small way she could manage, desperate to undo even a fraction of the damage her wounded pride had caused. Damon followed the scent trail deep into unfamiliar territory, the moon rising higher overhead, casting long shadows through the trees, every instinct in his body screaming at him to move faster, to reach her before whatever plan these hostile wolves had for her bloodline could be set into motion. He had no way of knowing, as he ran, that Ren was far from helpless in the hands of her captors, that the ability she had spent her whole life fearing and hiding was about to reveal itself in a way none of them, not Damon, not the council, not even Ren herself, had fully anticipated. Ren woke with her wrists bound and her head throbbing, the ground beneath her cold and unfamiliar, the canopy overhead thick enough to blot out most of the moonlight. 3 wolves in partial shift stood a short distance away, speaking too quietly for her to make out full sentences, though the occasional word drifted toward her. Bloodline, worth, patience. She kept her breathing slow and even, forcing down the panic clawing up her throat, taking stock of her surroundings the way her aunt had once taught her, years ago, during quieter, safer days. Her wrists were bound with rope, not chain, and the knot, though tight, wasn't expertly tied. Her captors seemed confident enough in their numbers and her apparent helplessness that they hadn't bothered with more elaborate precautions. One of them noticed her stirring and crouched down beside her, a broad-shouldered man with cold, assessing eyes. "Awake," he said, almost pleasantly. "Good. We have questions for you, and it will go easier if you answer them honestly." "What do you want?" Ren asked, keeping her voice steadier than she felt. "Your bloodline," the man said simply. "We've heard rumors for years about a lineage capable of more than healing instincts, the ability to calm a shift, sense danger before it strikes, and, if the old stories are true, something far more valuable still. We intend to find out exactly what you're capable of, one way or another." Fear spiked through Ren's chest. sharp and immediate, but beneath it, something else stirred too. A strange, steady clarity she'd felt only in flashes before, usually while treating patients, moments when instinct sharpened into something closer to certainty. She focused on it now, deliberately, the way she might focus on a difficult diagnosis, letting it build rather than pushing it away out of old, ingrained fear. The bound rope around her wrists felt suddenly less solid than it had moments before, an odd, prickling awareness spreading down through her fingers, as though she could sense the exact tension holding the knot together, the precise point where a small twist of pressure would loosen it entirely. She had never consciously tried to use whatever ability lived inside her for anything beyond healing. She had no idea, in this moment, whether it would extend to something like this, but desperation made her willing to try. She worked her wrists, slowly, carefully, while keeping her captor's attention focused on her face rather than her hands, answering his questions with just enough hesitation and half-truths to seem convincingly frightened and cooperative, buying herself time. Meanwhile, Damon closed the distance through the trees with a speed born of pure desperation. His wolf senses locked onto the fading edges of Ren's scent trail, growing fainter with every passing minute. He caught sight of firelight, flickering between the trees ahead, and slowed, forcing himself into careful silence, despite every instinct screaming at him to charge forward. He counted 3 shapes near the fire, and a 4th figure seated on the ground a short distance away, bound. Ren. Relief and fury collided inside him with such force he nearly lost his careful restraint entirely, but he held himself back, watching, waiting for the right moment, knowing that a reckless charge against 3 armed wolves could easily get them both killed. He didn't have to wait long. Ren finally worked the rope loose enough to slip free, and in the same instant, feeling the strange, steady clarity inside her surge higher, she reached toward the nearest wolf guarding her, not with her hands, but with whatever ability lived beneath her skin, some instinct guiding her without full understanding of what she was doing. The wolf staggered suddenly, disoriented, his half-shifted form flickering unsteadily, as though something had reached inside him and yanked at the delicate balance between his human and wolf halves. It was enough of a distraction. Damon broke from the tree line at a dead run, closing the distance before the other 2 wolves could fully register the threat, colliding with the nearest one hard enough to send them both crashing through the underbrush. The fight that followed was fast and brutal, Damon's fury lending him a strength he hadn't fully tapped into before, years of training crystallizing into something sharp and immediate, and entirely focused on one goal: protecting Ren, whatever the cost. Ren, meanwhile, turned her attention to the second wolf still standing, the disoriented one steadying himself and lunging toward her with a snarl. She didn't run. Instead, she reached out again, instinct guiding her hands to press against his chest as he closed the distance, and the same strange, steady pulse of ability surged through her fingers, this time far more focused, more deliberate. The wolf's snarl choked off into a startled gasp, his body going rigid, the half-shift collapsing entirely as he crumpled to the ground, unconscious but breathing. By the time Damon finished with the third wolf, breathing hard, blood trickling from a shallow cut along his forearm, he turned to find Ren standing over the second attacker, her hands trembling, her expression somewhere between shock and dawning understanding of exactly what she'd just done. Ren. He crossed to her quickly, checking her over for injuries, relief crashing through him so hard his knees nearly buckled when he found her mostly unharmed. "Are you all right?" "I don't know what that was," Ren said, staring down at her own hands as though they belonged to someone else. "I've never done anything like that before. I didn't even know I could." "Whatever it was," Damon said, pulling her into his arms, holding her tightly enough that she could feel his heart still hammering against her cheek. "It saved both our lives tonight." They didn't linger long at the site, aware that reinforcements from the hostile territory might not be far behind. Damon half-carried, half-guided Ren back through the trees toward Vale territory, pack enforcers meeting them part-way, having picked up the scent trail themselves once the fight's noise carried far enough to draw attention. Damon's father arrived among them, relief breaking openly across his usually stern face at the sight of his son alive and largely unharmed. It was only once they were safely back within Vale's borders, Ren wrapped in a blanket and finally allowed to sit and process everything that had happened, that the true significance of the night began to settle over the gathered pack. She had not merely defended herself, She had, without any training or preparation, subdued 2 trained wolves, using an ability the old stories had once called dangerous enough to hunt. Whatever fear had lingered around her bloodline before that night had just been answered, decisively, by proof of exactly what that bloodline could do when the person carrying it chose to protect rather than harm. Celine arrived among the search party's stragglers, and upon seeing Ren safe, broke into open, unguarded tears, the guilt she'd carried since Damon's confrontation, finally spilling over completely. She knelt before Ren without hesitation, offering an apology raw enough that no one present, not even Damon's still wary father, could doubt its sincerity. Ren, exhausted and still trembling from adrenaline, found she had no room left inside her for anger. "It's over now," she said quietly. "That's enough for me." It wasn't quite forgiveness, not fully, not yet, but it was a beginning, and as the pack slowly made its way back toward the heart of Vale territory, the night's danger fading behind them, something had shifted permanently in how the gathered wolves looked at Ren Ashford, no longer as an unwelcome disruption to tradition, but as someone who had, in the moment it mattered most, proven herself exactly the kind of protector any pack would be fortunate to call one of their own. In the weeks that followed the attack, Vale territory settled into a season of careful, steady healing, both literal and otherwise. Ren returned to the healing house within days, insisting on getting back to her work, despite everyone's gentle protests that she take more time to recover. She found, if anything, that pack members now sought her out more readily than before, no longer whispering behind her back but greeting her openly, some even asking, with genuine curiosity rather than suspicion, about the ability that had saved her life and, by extension, protected the pack's future alpha. Elder Corwin called a final council session 2 weeks after the attack, and this time, when Ren entered the hall, the atmosphere bore little resemblance to the tense, accusatory inquiry of weeks before. Corwin rose to address the gathered elders and pack members, with a warmth in his voice that surprised even Damon. "We convened weeks ago to determine whether Ren Ashford's bloodline posed a risk to this pack," Corwin said. "I think recent events have answered that question more clearly than any inquiry could have. She was taken from her own home, threatened, and endangered because of what she carries, and in the moment it mattered most, she used that same ability not to harm, but to protect herself and her mate. I would ask the council to formally recognize her, not merely as tolerated, but as a valued member of this pack, deserving of the same standing and protection as any other." The vote, when it came, was overwhelming, and Damon felt something in his chest finally unknot completely as he watched Ren's expression shift from cautious disbelief into something brighter, something he hadn't seen from her before, the unguarded, open relief of someone who had spent her whole life expecting rejection and had finally, fully, been welcomed instead. Celine's family formally withdrew from the marriage arrangement in the days that followed, though not without lingering tension. Celine herself, in a quiet conversation with Damon shortly before her family's departure, offered a final, sincere apology, along with an unexpected piece of information: her family, in an effort to repair some of the damage her actions had caused, had agreed to strengthen ties with Vale through trade rather than marriage, preserving at least some portion of the security the original alliance had been meant to provide. "It's not everything your father wanted," Celine admitted, "but it's something. I owed the pack that much at least." Damon accepted the gesture with more grace than he might have managed weeks earlier, understanding now that Celine's actions, however dangerous their consequences, had come from genuine hurt rather than true malice, and that the whole tangled mess of the past several weeks had, in its own strange way, revealed exactly who among them was willing to take responsibility when things went wrong. With the council's formal recognition secured and the immediate danger past, Damon turned his attention to the one thing he'd been waiting weeks to do properly. He found Ren in the garden behind the healing house, on a warm, quiet evening, the same garden where their strange, unlikely story had first truly begun. "I've been thinking," he said, sitting down beside her among the herb beds, "about how this all started. You, in a gray dress at the edge of a crowd, looking like you wanted nothing more than to disappear. Me, standing there with a rejection speech I never managed to say." Ren smiled, setting aside the basket of herbs she'd been sorting. "I remember it a little differently. I remember being terrified you were about to humiliate me in front of the entire pack." "I know," Damon said softly. I'm sorry it took me so long to prove you wrong." "You didn't take long at all," Ren said. "You just needed the chance to show it." Damon reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple woven cord, the kind pack tradition used to formally mark a mating bond, dyed a deep, earthy green that reminded him of the exact shade in her eyes the night they first met. "I know we've already been through the ceremony, the declaration, more danger than either of us should have had to face in a single season," he said. "But I want to do this properly, in our own way, without the council, without an audience, without anything except the two of us and the truth of what I feel." Ren's eyes glistened as she watched him lift the cord toward her wrist. "Damon Ashcombe," she said quietly, "are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm telling you," Damon said, a smile breaking across his face, "that I intend to spend the rest of my life proving that the moon knew exactly what it was doing the night it bound us together. If you'll have me." "I've had you since the moment you couldn't say the words," Ren said, laughing through tears as she extended her wrist toward him. He tied the cord carefully, the simple knot settling into place like the closing of a long, difficult chapter and the opening of a far brighter one. Around them, the garden hummed quietly, with the ordinary sounds of evening settling over Vale territory, birds calling from the tree line, the distant murmur of pack life continuing on, entirely unaware of the small, significant moment unfolding among the herb beds. Months later, when Damon finally rose to take his place as alpha, Ren stood beside him before the full gathered pack, no longer the overlooked Omega hiding at the edge of a crowd, but his equal in every sense that mattered, respected in her own right for the healer she had always been, and the protector she had proven herself capable of becoming when it counted most. The pack that had once questioned whether she belonged, now looked to her with a trust that had been earned through action rather than granted through rank or lineage. Damon looked out over the gathered crowd, his hand resting steady in Ren's, and thought back to that first impossible night, when a single glance had shattered every careful plan he'd made and set him on a path he could never have predicted, and would never, for a single moment, wish to undo. The moon had chosen for him, in the end, exactly what he needed, long before he understood he needed it at all, and though the moon's bond had brought them together, it was choice, tested through fear, danger, and doubt, that had truly made them mates in every way that mattered, now and for all the years still waiting ahead of them.